believe that whether you are a doctor, an accountant, a lawyer, or an air traffic controller, you should be hired and promoted based on skill and competence, not race or gender. You should be hired based on merit.
It's a no-brainer, right? Probably why that speech received like a 76% approval rating from the American public. Hire based on merit. It's one of those things that gets most people nodding their head. Yeah, they should. So why is that not a thing in the federal government where it should probably be mostly a thing there? Joining me now, Luke Rosiak, investigative reporter with the Daily Wire, has a wonderful, fascinating piece out on why this doesn't happen with the feds. Hey, Luke, I'll let you filibuster. The floor is yours. Why doesn't the federal government, why hasn't it been hiring on merit?
It's really amazing, Jesse. Back in the 1970s, there were some minorities who didn't get hired for federal jobs, and so they sued. And what they were alleging is at the time, the government had it sort of down to a science, how to identify out of the thousands or millions of people applying for federal jobs. How do you rank them? How do you sort through all those resumes and get the best of the best? Well, they had this exam called the Professional Administrative Career Examination. And it was kind of like the SAT for applying to work for the federal government. It could figure out how smart you were, how good you were going to be at your job. And it was very accurate. They did all these studies that it turned out to very accurately predict who was going to go on to be a good employee. But it turned out that there was some racial impacts to that. It wasn't the exact same racial breakdown of blacks, whites, and Hispanics as you would get if you just hired in essentially a random lottery. And so there were some minorities who sued, and Jimmy Carter was president at the time. Even he said, no, well, we need to be able to hire the best. I mean, this makes sense to figure out whether you can do the job before we hire. But eventually they kind of bullied him, and after he lost election, he sort of just kind of threw in the towel and agreed to settle with this group of plaintiffs. So this is back in 1981, and it was supposed to be this 5-year sort of court order where these plaintiffs could, basically the government agreed to stop using this exam, and the plaintiffs were supposed to choose. They had veto power over the new examination. So here's the problem, Jesse. They weren't able to figure out any exam that did not have racial impact. The Office of Personnel Management developed 6 different tests to figure out who the best employees were. But the more accurately it predicted what a good employee you were going to be, the more it had disparate impact on minority groups. And so they just weren't able to find a test that hired competent employees and resulted in a federal workforce that exactly mirrored the population as a whole. And so the only test they could figure out that got the racial results they were looking for was a self-assessment. And so this is where we are right now for decades. This is how you come to get a federal job: is you fill out a multiple choice exam, where the more you brag and boast, the more you get the job. And so basically we now screen federal employees for arrogance instead of competence. And that's resulted in the racial makeup that they were looking for.
What? So I just want to make sure I'm clear about this, because I've never applied for a federal position. So the application for a federal job just involves telling the federal government that you're really great? Do I have that right?
That's right. So instead of saying, like, here are a bunch of math questions to figure out whether you're good at math, they ask you, how great are you at math? And if you're like, man, I'm the best at math, nobody's better at math than me, then you get hired. And so this has been the only exam they've found that has been able to get them the requisite number of blacks and Hispanics. And so for 40 years, we've had this random DC court settlement. And again, it was only supposed to last 5 years, but they couldn't find any normal test that would do what they were looking for. So we've had total DEI hiring across all federal agencies for almost half a century. And it literally explicitly, Jimmy Carter was just like, yeah, we can't hire for competence because then we won't be able to hire any black people. Like, it sounds racist when you say what Jimmy Carter's position was. But that's how the federal government has been operating. And so Trump is challenging this in court. He's got his U.S. attorney in D.C. making a very strong argument that this should have never been in place, and especially after recent Supreme Court rulings on affirmative action, there's no way that this is justified. Not to mention the fact that there is no underrepresentation of blacks in the federal workforce. They're actually 50% overrepresented. So I don't know why this DEI scheme would even be justified, to say nothing of the fact that this is supposed to be a short-term thing that, like all affirmative action programs, just somehow goes on forever anyway.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Look, great reporting, by the way. Before I let you go, I have to ask. So Trump's challenging this in court. We're looking at all these different cuts. Marco Rubio comes out, says all these USA contracts are being stopped. 50% of IRS agents are going to be let go. My question is, how permanent are these things, Luke? Or the next time we get some worthless old commie like Biden, are they just going to go in and re-implement all these things?
Well, I mean, I guess that's where Congress has got to do its job. You know, we got to see about this CR where DOGE is making all these budget cuts. I mean, we really need to see that reflected in Congress giving less money to these agencies. And even when it comes to laying off employees, they have all these kind of appeal rights, Merit Systems Protection Board, and so on. And one of the best ways to ensure that we can fire these people, that the DOGE layoffs actually stick, is cutting the agency's budget, because that's a great justification where you have to tell a judge, look, of course we had to lay them off. We don't have the money. So it comes down to Congress.
He is Luke Rosiak, Daily Wire. Go read all of his stuff. You want to be in the know, if you will, as we say. Luke, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.